Send me the link. Or are you just going to post it and then out?
I will just be posting it. Apparently we're online. Who knows?
Welcome to online.
Yeah, it's receiving my content over here on the YouTube side. That's always a good sign.
Excellent. Well, in 20 seconds we'll know for sure if it's working.
Yeah, we can just bum around for a bit until I can copy this link here.
As usual, wait for all you guys to get in before we start talking about all the super exciting stuff that we have to discuss that we haven't worked out yet.
Yeah, so there's no point doing anything. There we go. It is in.
For those of you wondering, we had Nando's for lunch, but not for dinner. So
yeah, well, Steve was still happy though.
I was still happy. What do we have? Schnitz.
Yeah.
Which is like Nando's, but grilled Nando's. Well, Nando's is grilled.
It's like a schnitzel Nando's.
Yeah, it's a schnitzel.
Instead of,
So crumbed Nando's.
Yeah, yeah.
It was alright. It wasn't bad. Tim said it's usually pretty crap, but his partner wanted to go, so we let her...
Let her decide, and we're never letting her decide again.
No, it was good. It was good. It just wasn't as good as Nando's, but yeah, Nando's twice would have been amazing. But we had it once, so I can't complain. We had it for lunch. That was good, and then we had chicken again.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some people in the chat. A few different names there than the previous stream, so that's nice.
Cool. Right, I'll get the chat up as well, so I can have a look.
Nice Qualcomm drink thing there. Thanks, Qualcomm, for that one.
We'll probably talk mostly about the GeForce 20 series, the RTX stuff, but if there's any questions or anything else you want to talk about, feel free to throw that in the chat, and we will talk about that as well. We didn't talk too much about anything other than our review of the rumors in the first stream, so you can go back and check that out if you want to. It was funny in some parts, painful in others, but that's done. And yeah, I suppose we'll start by talking about the RTX stuff. I did a bit of... Sal Kagan told us that the review NDA was for the 14th of September. I can't find anything official about that. I've reached out to a few people to try and get some information because we still haven't even signed an NDA. I see over at the infamous WCCF Tech that they're saying it is the 14th of September. No evidence is given. I can't find the NDA. But I guessed it would be a week ahead of the pre-release, the pre-sale launch, when they go to retail, I suppose, or the day you can physically buy one off shelves. So the fact that it's, what, 6 days or something before that, lines up with what I expected. Which will be good, because it'll be really good if we can show you the actual performance, the strengths, the weaknesses, the cons and pros of the product, before you dish out 500 US plus, up to, well...
Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't think you'll even be able to get one for 500 US at launch.
No, it'll be definitely a few months before...
Well, what's the cheapest pre-order price? 600 US?
Yeah, they were basically FE prices for the board partner cards, which is exactly the same as Pascal. They launched it, you know, FE prices. Yeah, you couldn't get one at MSRP for a few months, and then the mining craze. It was almost like a very small period you could get them.
Yeah.
And then sort of mining picked up.
And I think the only card worth buying is going to be the 2080 Ti. So the guys with really deep pockets, that card will be worth buying because it's a bit faster than the 1080 Ti, should be. And has some cool new features. It won't be good in terms of price to performance, but if you've got deep pockets...
high-end cards are never good
No, if you've got deep pockets, it'll be an awesome graphics card to own. But I think the 1070 is going to be...
Yeah, not as good as the 1070.
Well, like the 1070 was great value. The 970, despite the VRAM disaster, was still amazingly good value. But yeah, the 2070, I don't know. I can't see that being good myself.
But yeah, obviously, you know, we need to get these cards in our hands, but...
Just pure speculation at this point. Sorry, I'm just... Where did I...
Yeah, we did have a few things to chat about. Obviously, one of the things is that it turns out Shadow of the Tomb Raider is not going to launch with ray tracing. They'll add that in.
Not a surprise. I mean, it was very much the same story with DirectX 12 back in the day. We heard about all these amazing DirectX 12 files were coming out, and they were going to run awesome and be better performance and all this. And basically, you know... just this, it was going to transform gaming and be phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then we sort of got to the point where DirectX 12 games were meant to launch, and actually quite a few of the games launched that were supposed to have DirectX 12 but didn't. and then it got patched in later. And of
like
course,
Deus Ex, I think it was around that time, like the Deus Ex sort of.
Did even Tomb Raider launch?
Tomb Raider, I think, did launch with DX12 in it.
Hitman, that didn't, did it?
Not sure.
I can't recall. There was a lot of them that didn't.
Battle. I don't even think like
Battlefield 1.
4.
Yeah, Battlefield 1 definitely did, but it was garbage.
I thought Battlefield 4 added it in later, maybe. Or did it ever support it?
I don't think so, but I honestly can't recall. I'd have to check it out. But yeah, these things never go the way they say they're going to. Basically, well, my opinion, if you guys want to hear my summary of it, complete guesswork, speculation, so take all of this with a grain of salt. But as I said in my announcement video, I'm pretty sure NVIDIA are seizing the opportunity here to push their ray tracing technology, their RT cores, Tensor cores, all that stuff. And it makes so much sense to push it now, because if they did this during a time where AMD was really competitive, they'd have to sell these big complex GPUs at very small margins.
Yeah.
And
they'd have to compete with whatever AMD's
They'd have to compete with whatever AMD's doing.
Non-ray tracing performance.
And they've got this window where AMD is just not competitive at all. All they've got is Vega 56 and 64, and neither of them are competitive. And so they're slotting these products in at Vega levels of price to performance. Especially for Vega 64, and they're now pushing their ray tracing technology at this point in time where they can charge huge amounts and still make those margins on the big GPUs.
Yeah.
And then by the time the technology's out there, not necessarily refined, but there's some adoption, then with the next generation, they can add more, RT cores and things like that, and then it'll actually be worth owning a card that supports hardware accelerated ray tracing. So I think that's what's going on. So I think this would be the worst generation to buy in terms of value. So like I said, the 2080 Ti is going to be an amazing graphics card. If you can afford it, there's nothing better. It'll be awesome. But if you care about price to performance, I'd be skipping this generation and getting the 7nm cards that come next year.
Yeah, I mean, like, NVIDIA could have some magic in the works that would make these cards perform much greater than we're expecting, but it doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think much better. I think maybe 10 to 30% better than the estimates I gave in my coverage. I don't think it's going to be like 3 times better than the 20%.
No, I don't think it'll get it back into a position where the 2070 was as good value as the 1070 at launch, for example.
Well, they're like, at the launch prices with availability, they're going to be, like 80% more than Pascal equivalents?
And you're not going to get that. Even with the Magic, you're not going to get that. I mean,
the Magic might get you to 50%, like a lot of Magic.
Yeah, I mean, people have already pointed out all this stuff, but I mean, going to a launch event, companies at launch events always want to talk about everything good about the product, every possible little tiny bit, even irrelevant stuff. Like, I remember NVIDIA when they came up with like Ansel, they'd spend half an hour at their event talking about how awesome Ansel is.
God, that was painful.
Because anything that is good is always mentioned at the launch event. So anything that's omitted from a launch, it's not guaranteed for that part to be bad, anything that's been omitted from a launch event, but it's less likely to be a selling point of the product. So not talking about performance outside of ray tracing is a red flag for people like us that have been to so many of these.
You're 100% right, and it makes their what is it? Their 2 times, 1.5 times.
Yeah, 2 times.
It makes that claim so ridiculous. That is insane gains. So if you're 1.5, 1.5 to 2 times faster than your previous generation, you kind of want to lead with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And not release it in a single slide quietly on your website the day after your big, huge press event. Come on.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen this before with, AMD's Ryzen first and second, well, not necessarily as much second gen, but certainly first gen launch, when people were interested in the gaming performance of their CPUs and they only provided numbers at 4K or 1440p.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, by not showing us numbers at resolutions that we'd normally test CPUs with, like 1080p or 720p, that kind of indicates to us that those numbers aren't worth talking about from AMD's perspective, which means they're not all that good for them. So, and even with Threadripper 32 core, their review guide only showed numbers for their CPU in rendering applications.
We should come back to that as well.
Which, as it turns out, happened to have the best performance, and they admitted all the stuff it was bad for. So whenever you guys out there are seeing these live streams of products or any announcement, and you think you're personally thinking like, how's this going to perform? I'm interested in this segment that I think this card's going to be really good at, and they don't show you that performance, it's likely because that, as we've just been saying, that area isn't worth talking about in a positive way for them, because they only ever show stuff that is positive for them.
Alright, I just got some information coming in.
Hot off the press information here.
I'm not going to say who it is, of course, because they're giving it to me in confidence. But it looks like at least some of that WCCF Tech report is wrong. So WCCF Tech are claiming that some lucky reviewers currently have... I mean, okay, it's possible, but I've spoken to a couple of people. Anyway, their report saying that a couple of lucky reviewers or reviewers now are receiving samples after the event's finished. They're taking home 2080 and 2080 Ti cards with drivers to start benchmarking, which sounds like absolute BS to me, because never in history have either maybe AMD, I don't know, but AMD, Intel, and NVIDIA, very unlikely. NVIDIA has never given us more than a week, ever. In like the last 15, 20 years I've been doing this.
Yeah, it's pretty. A week is very standard.
A week is amazing.
Yeah, anything more than a week is like amazingly generous.
NVIDIA's usually like, here's the card 4 or 5 days ahead of release. We'll have the driver in 2 or 3 days. And that's what Jay's 2 cents always complains about. It's fair enough, but anyway, they've done this big report claiming all these things in their headline, like reviewers have graphics cards in hand, benchmarks are coming soon, blah 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 blah. And I just spoke to a couple of sources in the US, well-known reviewers who you guys will be aware of, and they said no, they're not getting samples for another week or so.
And these are people that attended the event.
They're on
so obviously, as you know, we did not. We mentioned this in the previous stream that we didn't want to go to Germany. Oh, it's a very long flight for us. But not only that, and this is something that I think a few people were bringing up in the Discord chat. I think it was maybe Nick that brought it up. And yeah, Linus had the same approach that basically, not only is it 24 hours flying each way for us to go to Germany, but then there's the multiple days you have to spend there exclusively paying attention to NVIDIA's content, which is, understandable that they'd want to do that. But for us, it's just us two making the content. So when you're trying to make daily content, one of us taking 4 days or 5 days off to make one content piece on the launch of the cards is that's potentially costing us like entire videos worth of content. Like maybe 1 or 2 videos would not be able to be done simply because we were attending that event. So even if they cover stuff like flights and accommodation, which is pretty standard price wise, it's the time cost of us not only having to potentially pay our own way there, but have that time taken away from
also the quality of the content, like we spoke about in the earlier stream today, is that first of all, only one of us would go, even though it'd be way better if we both went, because for the reasons Tim just said, we can't afford to have us both down and not producing content. So one of us goes to cover this event, and I can tell you now, I would not have been able to put together the video that I did 2 days ago covering the announcement, even though it was 10 hours late because I was asleep when they announced it. The quality of your work when you're on the showroom floor trying to work out what's going on and put together some sort of semi-coherent script is just, you just can't do the same level of analysis that you can at home, spending 2-3 hours researching everything and working out as much as you can.
Yeah, because often, straight after the events, there'll be a follow-up meetings or potentially lunches.
It's just difficult though to gather all those thoughts, then analyze everything and put out some decent content. It's just a lot harder. So anyway,
I think Bruno has an interesting question here that he posted in our Discord chat. They ask, let's say you still had to buy the hardware you're using in your rigs, would your decision making in buying new hardware be affected on past illegal or just immoral business practices from companies?
Is this us?
Us, yeah.
Okay, this is... well, do you want to answer that one first? Or
No,
me?
go ahead. Go ahead.
That's a tough one because... okay, I haven't thought this fully through, and this is just not my... let's say, okay, it's not my official response. It's just me talking with mates.
That's your get out of jail card that you've just deployed it right there.
If you'd all like to sign this disclaimer, I will continue. I don't think it's your job that, like... personally, no, is the short answer. No, I wouldn't care, because all I care about is price and performance. I want the best value for my money. You know, you work your job, you make your money, you don't want to spend more than you have to. You don't want to get rolled on a crappy deal. So you do your research, you find out what the best product is for your money, and you buy that, in my opinion. It depends on what they're doing. If it's like child labor or something, then okay. If it's bribing Dell or something like, or whatever, you know, things that Intel's been accused of, or doing something a bit dodgy with GameWorks, which does impact the gamer a bit. I don't know. It's a tough one, but if someone's benchmarked 30 games and the product you want to buy that's better in terms of value is faster in all those games and it has the features you want and it's at the right price, then you buy it. You don't go, oh, I'm going to buy this inferior product because I'm going to support the underdog. I know all the AMD fanboys bang on about that, but I don't know.
No, I totally agree. And I also think that, you know, as you sort of said, when these companies do, you know, dodgy sort of business practices, it's not dodgy in the way that, you know, children are getting murdered and
exploited or whatever.
Terrible stuff's happening. We're talking about a company doing something that's harming another, like $1 billion company doing something that's harming another $1 billion company. Yeah, it's like that sort of thing. It's all well and good to sort of, you know, chat about how that affects the market and all that sort of thing. But for an end consumer, like, it's not really all that important if $1 billion company is going to be slightly affected by that sort of thing. You should just be buying on price to performance, really. Like, my opinion would be different if it came out that, like, a major PC company was, like, using child labor or something to put these cards together or whatever.
That's totally different.
But that's different. And as Graham points out, there probably are, in some point in the supply chain, involved with illicit child behavior. Unfortunately, with, like, because all these cards use rare metals and stuff that...
Sure.
But it's, I would say it's unlikely that, you know, one particular company would be doing it and others wouldn't be, if in that sort of situation.
Yeah, if NVIDIA if NVIDIA or AMD came out with some policy with it, I mean, is there any way to get around that on certain levels with...
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great if that wasn't an issue, but I think that's probably something that's not affecting one person in particular.
No, like if it came out that... Anyway,
I'm just thinking that because a lot of those illegal and immoral issues are affecting company-to-company relations and the amount of money companies are making, that... At the end of the day, it's like...
I say it all the time, and I think a lot of people don't believe this because a lot of people like to believe or have to believe because they're so biased themselves that NVIDIA pay us to say good things about them, or AMD pay us, or Intel or whatever. And I've said it time and time again, I could not care less about either of these companies. Like, I just don't... I enjoy their tech, but I don't care at all about...
there's no emotional attachment.
Yeah, I enjoy it's like I enjoy a certain product because it was good, but it doesn't mean I love the company. Yeah, they just produced it, so good job.
Yeah, and you know, Carl here says in the chat, I think if price and performance was the same, something like GPP would sway me a certain direction.
Sure.
And that's true to an extent. I think, you know, a lot of those additional things like maybe, you know, G-Sync versus FreeSync, sort of the open versus closed ecosystem might sway you one way.
Yeah, that's reasonable, you know, but that's a feature.
Yeah, companies that, you know, go with a GameWorks type thing or go another way might be more up your alley, but... The reality is that it's very rare for products to be identical.
It's painful. Yeah, it's just, they're just companies. Like, we're annoyed because the GeForce 20 series is grossly overpriced and they're taking advantage of their position.
From the performance that we expect, we should qualify we haven't
everything I'm saying about these right now is all speculative. We have the specs as far as performance goes, we have NVIDIA stuff. But, okay, it appears... that in terms of price versus performance, they're much worse off than what we have with Pascal. and everyone's upset about that, us included. It's disappointing. But if we go back a few years to when AMD had their async compute engines and NVIDIA didn't have an answer to that and they were just doing software workarounds and NVIDIA had their hardware level stuff. AMD, sorry. If AMD had a massive performance advantage and they were like, well, we're charging 30% more than NVIDIA because async compute. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I know. It's very... I mean, I think async compute is less of a big deal for graphics than
100%.
ray tracing.
But it still takes up die space
Yeah,
and
yeah.
costs money to offer rather than not offer it and work around with drivers. But I'm just using an example, like, we would be annoyed. Well, we don't want to pay a premium for it. And they're like, but we're market dominant, so you have to.
Yeah, and like, I think this thing always comes up, you know, people always mention things like G-Sync and GameWorks, and on Intel side, their monopolistic practices, their low IPC gains generation over generation. But I think any company that's in a position that NVIDIA is in right now on the high end with graphics, and Intel was for a long time on CPUs, would do what those companies did. When you're completely unchallenged in your price segment and performance segment, you're going to do all this stuff. You're gonna charge as much as you possibly can. You know, you're going to be able to get away with doing stuff that will lock consumers into your ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sure. I think the Intel one's interesting because I think all that time they weren't really just sitting around on their hands going, let's just continue to make mad money off small dies. I think they were really trying to make progress.
Potentially.
Well, when Skylake came out, not Skylake, I think it was Kaby Lake. And I was speaking to some of the higher ups there at one of the events, and I'm like, why is there no IPC gains or virtually none? They said, like, we're trying. It's not easy. Like, we're doing everything to try and make these faster. And like, I guess
it helps when there's less pressure to accelerate.
But maybe that's why it's been a long time that we've had these security flaws have been around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they've genuinely hit a brick wall for a long time, and now they're
possibly.
So,
but yeah, I think, you know, even stuff like, you know, paying for certain features to be included in your games or to be like an AMD or NVIDIA optimized title or whatever. Like, if you're in a position to do that, you're going to do it because it benefits your company.
100%.
None of these companies are just running around all being like good Samaritans doing everything for the greater good. It's like... Yeah. Companies are trying to make money, and if you're the underdog, your position is always going to be in a more attractive price to performance position, have more open features and all that. And if you're in a monopoly position, you're going to act exactly like a monopoly.
Well, yeah, that's right. And NVIDIA has so much power and that's the GPP is a perfect example of that. Like they have, they have everyone by the balls to say, so to speak, because everyone desperately wants to be NVIDIA's good books because they want allocation because it means profits for them.
Yeah.
So they hold all the cards. That's why it was so funny. I haven't talked about this much, but that DDR4 version of the GT 1030 video that I did, there has been so many people comment and say, you don't know what you're talking about. This isn't NVIDIA's fault, blah, 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 blah. It's the board partners. They're the dodgy scumbags that are making DDR4 versions of this card. I'm sure NVIDIA's not happy about it and doesn't want to let them. I'm like, oh, like that is not at all how this industry works. Like NVIDIA dictates everything, and if you deviate from their spec in any way that upsets them, you'll know about it. Like no one can change the memory or anything. Like the memory that's on the cards is to the spec that NVIDIA determined. You can make it better as long as that's well, I suppose you can't like you possibly couldn't have gone with real fast memory if it was available, if they didn't want that, if they were reserving that for a higher end GPU. So for example, if the Titan had like 14 gigabits per second memory and they said that the 1080 can only have 10, you couldn't put the 14 on it.
Like an easy thing to see is like no 1060s ever came out with GDDR5X.
Yeah.
No, was the 1070 as well didn't include 5X memory?
The 1070s didn't either. They were GDR5.
So one of the obvious things that a board partner could do if they were free to do things is simply swap out the non-X for X memory and get a performance boost.
So-
But they are, as you say, completely locked down.
Yeah, they 100% can't do that. So if you've ever wondered why someone doesn't make, a GDDR5X 1070 to say, hey, we've got the fastest 1070 out there, they can't do that. That'll be a breach of their contract, and they'll have their allocation severely reduced as a...
Oh, they'll probably just be straight up terminated.
Well, they could potentially terminate. There'll be a repercussion of some type. So, yeah, it's so funny when all these people are saying, you don't understand how this works. It's the board partners like Galax that are dodgy, that are using cheap memory. It's like, NVIDIA just wouldn't... Yeah. So, anyway, NVIDIA fully dictate it, and they're not free to use whatever they want. And they definitely can't make NVIDIA GPUs look like trash without NVIDIA's say-so.
No, because it impacts them massively to have these products on the market.
How bad does that... Imagine if someone made a DDR4 GTX 1060 or something.
Yeah. And I'm fairly certain that whenever a company comes out with a new product, they would have to go through some NVIDIA validation process, because, these companies have the ability to change the cooler, and they could very well put on a horrendous cooler that would make their product seem bad.
Yeah.
So they're definitely not going to be allowed to do that. So, there's all sorts of checks and balances when these sort of engineering products are going through, and the documents that you get from, like you can go and look up, Intel, for example, publishes their specifications for their CPUs, and the documents are like 400 pages long.
Yeah, and you've got to be an engineer to read them.
Yeah, and they've got all sorts of stuff in there that you have to follow to the letter.
That's why you love reading them. That's Tim's light reading.
There's some juicy stuff in there.
I just go to WCCF Tech.
Yeah.
That's my level.
Yeah, you're a Gamer Meld fan.
Ooh.
Can I say that on the stream, or is that like a snippet that people use against you now?
Yeah, that's
I've
rough.
labelled you in that way.
That's rough. I feel hurt. What else have we got on the menu here?
Yeah, well, good to have 17 people. I think that's a few more than the earlier one, actually. So maybe this European time slot is suiting people a bit better.
Yeah, we're happy to do this twice now in the one day. So a lunchtime and a dinner time stream.
Yeah.
So,
if there's enough to talk about.
Well, if people miss out though, we can just repeat it live and answer, because it's kind of unfair that if you want to ask a question live, I mean, you can ask it in the Discord chat any time, but it's nice to do the live streams. Well, Steve, you have been watching Gamer Meld on YouTube. Yeah, I've watched a lot.
You're going to get recommended so much now.
A lot. No, I watched it in incognito.
Oh, so. No. Nice. Is that so annoying on YouTube when you binge one channel and then that's all you get recommended?
I don't want to talk about this again. But that's the annoying thing about this, though, because if YouTube knows you watch a certain category, you're into tech, if it knows this, and you're only subscribed to 1 or 2 tech channels, if there's another tech channel that's putting out something that's trending and it's really popular, they will just automatically recommend that channel to you, because they're like, well, you like tech, we want to keep you on the platform, you're probably going to like this channel because they talk about tech and they're popular. And that's why they've done so well by doing what they did and all the crap we just went over in the last stream that I don't really want to talk about ever again, so I'm done with it.
We had our fun with Gamer Meld.
Review the Rumors is done. I'm over it.
Maybe next time. There'll definitely be so many Navi rumors.
If there's a next time, you're doing the research.
Oh, all right.
That was worse than the Megamix. I would rather
the Megamix was worse.
I would rather drink 2 more Megamixes than go through that backlog of of videos.
Wouldn't it be funny if we were at an event like Computex and we ran into Gamer Meld?
Not really.
Oh,
well, yeah, I've got nothing against the guy. I'd probably say, hi, how you going? I don't hate him.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
I don't particularly like the content.
It'd be pretty awkward, I reckon.
Well, we've never said anything really that publicly apart from our Discord.
Maybe he's in our Discord.
He's crying in the chat. Apologies.
He's devastated because we just ripped on his content for like an hour.
But like I said, we just had a bit of fun with it. We don't want to send any hate his way or anything like that. But it was a bit ridiculous. And I felt like we had to...
It was very ridiculous.
Yeah, I thought it was something, that we could talk about with the patrons. It was a bit funny. don't expect that everyone enjoys that kind of content. We're not going to do it a lot. It was a one-off thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Anyway.
pretty funny though.
The Gene Graham stands for Gail. They're not going to let it go.
Yeah.
Is Sal Kagan around? He's probably...
No, it's probably asleep, isn't he? The American that he is. No,
yeah,
it's not in the. He is. No, he's the yellow in the Discord.
He had a question that he wanted us to address in the Q&A, which we're not. So it was a bit mean. So I was going to address it now quickly for him. Anyway.
He can watch the replay.
Yeah, you can watch the replay. Let's not address it. Let's quickly move on.
Yep. I'd be so devastated.
Yeah. That was a very serious question.
All right, we have got a question here from Konstantin. What do you think of the...
Okay, well, I can answer that one, but you can go for it first if you want.
No, go for it. Have you seen it?
Yep. Well, it's not possible is the main reason. Yeah, this is the question here, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not really possible to do. Is that what's your take on that?
I'm just trying to figure out what he's trying to ask.
He's asking why can't you get an expansion card that has memory already on it, and you can just swap the GPU out. So.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I thought he was saying CPU here, not instead of GPU.
Now he's asking why can't GPUs just be interchangeable? Well, first of all, it's pretty pointless because by far the most expensive component is the GPU. So
yeah,
you just you put that on a PCB. The PCB is essentially worthless. The memory, which is the GPU is designed to work with. See, there's a few problems. GPUs have a certain type of memory bus, a memory interface, and the memory chips have to be aligned to work with that. So you'll hear like 256-bit wide, 384-bit wide, and the traces and the way the memory work is, you can't that's why like the GTX 1060 is 6 gigabytes, an odd number, because the amount of ROPs that it has and the cores and stuff, the configuration of the core. So you couldn't even have a massive like 512-bit wide and then put a 256-bit chip on there. It just wouldn't work like that. So that'd be one of the reasons as well.
Yeah, so a lot of things would be incompatible.
Incompatibility is the big problem. But also it just doesn't matter because the only things that cost money, well, in order of, the PCB would be the cheapest. Then memory or probably cooler would be the next cheapest thing.
Yep.
Then you've got your memory and then your GPU. And then you've got your VRM. So, and again, that will vary massively depending on how much power the GPU uses.
The VRM, I imagine, would be fairly cheap.
Yeah. It depends on the GPU, though. Like something to deliver 300 watts. I mean, I'm not saying
the components are probably like $1 each, if that. Like, probably well under.
Yeah, I'm not sure about like good power stages. I think I'm not sure. I honestly don't know. I think they're probably a little bit more, but not 100% sure on that one. But even like the power delivery will vary massively from chip to chip and how it's designed. So apart from the fact that it's just not possible, it doesn't make sense because if you take the GPU off the card, like if you took the 2080 Ti GPU off that card, the card's worth like, I don't know, maybe $100.
Are you including the GDDR6 in that or not?
Well, I don't know the pricing on, what is it, 11 gigabytes of...
Well, a motherboard is much more complicated in terms of its PCB.
Yeah, and they're like $100.
You can get a really cheap one for a lot less than
No, so I'm saying the PCB and the VRM would be cheap. What's a slab of aluminium with a couple of heat pipes and a few fans on it worth?
$30.
So you're looking at maybe $100 for the physical, like the large part of the card. The bulk of its weight is worth less than $100, $100. And all the money is in the GPU and then a bit of the money in the memory, whatever the memory is worth. So it's not worth it, I think is what we're working towards there.
Yeah, and too complicated. Too complicated and not worth it.
Yeah, it's a cool idea if it was possible.
Yeah, I mean, the best you're going to get is even then, like, it'll be like a laptop with an MXM slot or something where
Well-
the GPU and memory's on a board and then the VRM is off.
Yeah,
off
and
it, but-
that's why they suck, because the
Yeah.
resale value, like, it'd be terrible. It'd be more of a waste of resources in a way, because you've got this expensive bit of silicon that you just have to throw away. Like, it can't be used unless you then go buy another card. So then you'd end up buying graphics cards to put GPUs on, because once you upgrade your GPU, you're not gonna. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, not a dumb question or anything like that. It's an interesting.
No, I'm sure there's plenty of people that are wondering about that.
I've been asked a lot. It's a very interesting question, but that's the reason behind it. When Intel releases a GPU, it will be possible.
Their GPU is going to be very interesting.
I'm
very, very interesting.
Very intrigued by that.
Especially for a first generation product, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows?
Intel graphics drivers have always sucked, so
They'll need to hire a fair few people for that.
That'll be a big hurdle, I think.
Reminds me of one time actually that it was back almost over a year ago now. I published a video on Hardware Unboxed about playing games on Intel HD graphics, and I was mentioning about how most of the time it's pretty crap. Obviously, everyone knows that. And then some dude from Intel reached out via email and was like, "Oh, we're running it on the latest drivers now. Drivers have been really improving and everything." And I was like, "Well, I was running it on the latest drivers, but also Intel kind of has a reputation for never having ever had good HD graphics drivers." And then point to like their releases and they'd say like, "Oh yeah, but we optimized for the latest games." And it's like for one of the latest games in the last 6 months. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably going to be the biggest hurdle more than the actual physical hardware.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at a driver these days, and you look at the file size, and every single time it gets larger because there's so much code in there that is game specific.
Funny
code.
you say that. I was thinking when we were talking about the RTX stuff earlier, I'm thinking, how big is this going to balloon drivers out to, with like the deep learning stuff in there? The
big.
Yeah, I don't know how big, but that stuff can't be small.
Eventually, I'm sure they'll move to some sort of system where it'll detect games you've installed and then download the microcode.
Yeah, I think it'll be game drivers. You'll have like a general driver, and then each game will have a game driver that loads. Because for all that deep learning stuff...
Yeah, you never know.
Like...
And especially as, the deep learning
either that
changes and the hardware changes from generation to generation. You have a game and it would need to support so many different types of
Yeah, and they can't really patch all
architectures.
that into the game because it'll be different, a little bit different for AMD.
Yeah.
So just balloon the games out even
Yeah,
more.
so I mean, if you're not aware of how game drivers work, I'm sure this is something we've mentioned before, but many video games ship basically broken, and it's up to the driver teams at AMD and Nvidia to get the games working well. And this has been mentioned many times by people who are directly involved with driver and game development.
That's initially, and then they...
Well, yes.
Yeah.
The issue tends to be that, especially with new game engines, it can be a bit of an issue because the driver has to do a lot of work with certain types of engines. Then if a game is using multiple games using the same engine, it can be easier to tighten up a few things here and there.
Yeah.
And you'll get the general gains of, say, the Unreal Engine 4 driver work that's been done. But certainly when a new game comes out using a brand new engine, it's if you're playing that game, say, 3 months ahead of release, it will perform terribly until the driver team works on it.
And this is where Nvidia quite obviously has a big advantage because they have a bigger driver team, more money's thrown at it.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
sure
why it's so
cons and pros, but overall you could buy either. But the truth is, fanboying crap aside, the GTX graphics card will be a safer purchase if you grab the latest and greatest games or play really old games that are no longer supported that well. Because chances are it will work better. And we've seen it with like games like Frostpunk. We see it all the time. I'm constantly adding new games to my test suite. And the new games often always favour Nvidia unless it's like an AMD sponsored title like a Far Cry 5.
Yeah.
And then when AMD eventually gets around to it, sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's 6 months, then you start to see the optimizations and performance climbs up to where it should be. So that's just...
Yeah, it's
that's a pitfall of...
It's crucial. And
yeah,
I mean, theoretically, it should get better when more games start using lower level APIs, because a lot of the things that the driver team would have been doing previously is shifted a bit more onto the development team. But obviously that is just shifting a cost from, developers, or from the driver team at AMD and NVIDIA to the developers. So yeah, either way, someone has to do that optimization. I mean, there's still obviously several layers of abstraction even with DX12. It has to take the stuff, do a bit of juicing around in the middle, and then you gets to the GPU. But it's certainly.
Constantine says during the RAM shortage, the GPU prices soar. So reusing RAM chips could have helped. That's why he thought of the idea of the swap of interchangeable GPUs. It makes a lot of sense. Truth be told, though, or maybe I shouldn't lead with that. In my opinion, I don't think that the soaring graphics card prices was really due to RAM. Like, we heard a lot of times, RAM shortage, prices are inflated, but it was like $15 a card.
Yeah, and we're looking at a card as well, when the biggest part of that mining boom was at the start of this year. So and a lot of those Pascal cards were 18 months old at that point, and they were like,
but the RAM inflating the prices.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that, like, even during that, people during that time were saying, like, oh, it's a little bit of mining, a little bit of memory pricing.
Yeah, it was a lot of mining and a little bit of memory.
Yeah, that's it, because like a card that's 18 months old, like a GPU like the GTX 1080 that's 18 months old, should be costing NVIDIA a lot less to produce that chip now, because
yields are
better on the GPU. So that card that was selling for $499 might now cost, let's just say, $399 or $449 or something to produce.
Sure, yeah.
And then the memory might have inflated by $15 in price.
So they offset it.
Overall, it still is costing the manufacturer less to make the card. Or at least it should be costing them less.
It's like when you buy a house and you have interest rates and you work out what you can afford, and if it goes up by this much, are you still living in a house or are you homeless? And when NVIDIA sets these MSRPs, they will account for a volatile thing like memory pricing, and they'll say, if memory goes to this extreme level, can we still meet the MSRP? Yes or no? And so they work all that stuff out. And adding $15 on to a GTX 1070 or whatever, not a big deal. It doesn't explain why they were, I don't know, what did they go up to? Like $800 or something stupid like that at the peak? So that's all mining and
I think it's definitely a fair point that if the card costs the same amount to manufacture, and especially on low-end cards where I'm sure the margins are lower, that the memory pricing increase is going to be a bigger chunk of the pie. And that's what we saw on cards like an RX 570 and a GTX 1050, where a lot of that price is attributable to the
it's a larger percentage, but it's $15 at the end of the day.
Yeah, but
they have less RAM on the.
They're probably still, there's less room to move in terms of getting better yields on those sort of much smaller dies. Whereas at the high end, I don't see any reason why memory should have affected the pricing, especially 18 months.
Oh, that's 100%. That's 100% true. But even so, take mining out of the equation. The memory should have gone. Every graphics card should have gone up between $7 and $15, depending on the amount of RAM they had. So if all graphics cards of all price tiers went up $15, I don't think...
Yeah. And
relatively speaking...
There's already a fluctuation in prices between various OEM cards. Like, not every card is selling for $500. It's like $500 up to $550 often. Yeah. And then it'll just be the usual race to the bottom, where there'll always be some cards that are more expensive than others. So...
Definitely.
Yeah. So Mitch says RTX is NVIDIA based, or AMD cards tank with ray tracing. As Nesta says, isn't RTX DirectX based? Yes, we talked about this a bit in the Q&A, but the basic way it works is that RTX is a lower level feature than DirectX. So DirectX passes on ray tracing calls. Like, the game will go, I want to ray trace, then it'll tell that to DirectX, and then DirectX will tell that to RTX, and RTX will then do its magic so that it works on the GPU. As opposed to GameWorks, which sits above DirectX in terms of providing features that, work into DirectX and then go down the stack. So, yes, it's RTX isn't DirectX based it's not that's not really the way it works, but it definitely is a sort of functionality that sits below DirectX. So theoretically, any game that's implementing RTX-based ray tracing without GameWorks, because GameWorks does have a ray tracing element that they can implement on top of DirectX. So if they don't use that, then any game that calls ray tracing through DirectX should be able to work on an AMD card when they develop their own RTX system.
Yeah, and so
yeah, TressFX is different in that that's above DirectX
it'll
functionality.
be very interesting to see. I was going to say if, but I feel like that's being naive. How badly NVIDIA abuse RTX, like when they both have hardware acceleration, like the GameWorks implementation of it.
Yeah, that'll be interesting for sure.
It feels I always shudder when NVIDIA has a new technology like this, because you just know their main concern isn't using it to benefit gamers. You just know it's not.
Yeah.
So it's anyway, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I mean they have to implement ray tracing through a feature like RTX sitting below DirectX.
That's not your dog, by the way.
No, that's not my dog. That's some terrible dog. But yeah, basically, they need to implement it as a low-level API feature so that when compute applications start wanting to do stuff like ray tracing, they can then, use the existing APIs like Open whatever, Vulkan or whatever these apps are using at the moment.
Yep.
There's some dog walking right past and it is making a ruckus.
It's like, hurry up and go. There was something you said earlier about the 2990WX, and I wanted to pick up
I
on
mentioned that in the review guide. It was all on
there was something I was going to add to that, and it's now escaped me. Might have to come back to that one.
Who knows?
I'll keep working on this. I should have made a note. That's what I should have done.
Bloody dogs.
Yeah. Oh, it's making its way further down the street now. So that's the problem with Tim's studio being in the garage. That its garages are very close to the road with very little insulation. So
fun stuff. I have a lot of fun filming.
That'll drive me crazy. But
yeah, it's not too bad most of the time.
So if you have any other questions, feel free to ask those as we waffle along.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess another thing to mention about RTX is that it's not just ray tracing. RTX also has several other deep learning features. I think they've only mentioned one, but apparently there's more than just ray tracing and the deep learning super sampling. So deep learning super sampling, DLSS, is part of RTX. Mm-hmm. So a game can be RTX enabled, but you're not necessarily going to get ray tracing if it's RTX enabled. You might just be getting DLSS.
Which I think is going to be the case on the 2070.
Yeah, there was a big... Well, that should support ray tracing, theoretically, but to what quality level, we're not sure. But there was a big list of RTX-enabled games that included things like Hitman 2 was in there, but that game only supports DLSS and doesn't support ray tracing. And games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider only support ray tracing and don't support... Or maybe Shadow of the Tomb Raider supports both, but I think maybe it's Battlefield 5. One of them only supports ray tracing and not the super sampling. But anyway...
Yeah, not 100% sure on that one. One of the things with the 2990WX I was going to say is that that's the $1,800 32-core processor. I don't know if I said it in my video, I think I might have, that it's just a really poorly timed product in the sense that we're going to get, what is it, Zen 2, so Threadripper 3 next year. A little bit confusing that.
Because Epic is sampling on 7nm at the end of this year.
Yeah. And
so
the 7nm Ryzen CPU is going to be way better. So it's kind of a really bad time in late 2018 to spend $1,800 on a 32-core CPU.
Yep. So Nick asks, what your crystal ball say as to how long Turing will be out before 7nm comes along. I mean, 7nm, it's publicly available information when 7nm will be ready. Products are sampling now already on 7nm, so companies that are in early production can get their chips manufactured already.
I just remembered what you said last time.
And then it'll be moving towards, I believe it's limited production on some products at the end of this year. So sort of more wider sampling, as well as I believe it will be AMD's 7nm compute GPUs will be out at the end of this year. And then it'll be quite widespread at the start of next year with, we already know that EPYC is coming out on 7nm, Zen 2 is 7nm, and all of those things are scheduled for early next year. EPYC for sure is scheduled very, first quarter, I believe, of next year. So, this is a very large jump for these manufacturers. So they are ready to go, not with just a tiny amount of production. They are ready to go full scale with lots of capacity.
Looking at the roadmap, it looked like March would be the earliest for consumer grade 7nm GPUs. You had I liked your guess that you talked about Computex.
Yeah, I think for...
I think I like that.
About Navi at the Computex of next year.
Was that in the Q&A that we came up with that one? I can't even remember.
I think it might have been in the first live stream.
Can't even remember.
I'm not sure. We've been talking a lot about this stuff today, but some people are suggesting that Navi will come out quite early in the year next year. But the way that it's happened in past years with AMD's GPUs is that they've released their new architecture in their compute cards actually quite a long time before their consumer cards. Like with Vega, they came out with, not the Frontier Edition, but they had these, I forget what they were called, they're like the MI25 or something.
Yeah.
And those came out more than 6 months, if not 9 months ahead of the...
It's because yields are terrible and they charge a fortune for them.
Yeah.
And see, NVIDIA knows this because they're going to be using the same process, essentially. So NVIDIA knows what is available to AMD. So they're not releasing this blindly hoping that they won't be able to have really good yields by the end of this year and release something. They kind of know when they're going to do it. So they know how long they've got. And rather than wait, because they don't have to, they've released this. And they know if it's the middle of next year or whatever when they'll be releasing new GPUs. They already know this now.
Yeah.
So,
and we're in a situation where both TSMC and Global Foundries will have 7nm ready at basically the same time.
Yeah.
So obviously AMD's Zen products will almost certainly be Global Foundries, considering what they've used in the
past.
past.
Aren't they using both? I might be getting...
I'm not sure.
Or is that for...
So NVIDIA will almost certainly be TSMC, considering they've used TSMC for
Yeah, I think AMD is using both.
They might be using both?
I think they are. I'll try and find that out quickly now. But go on.
But basically, when you get two companies, the two mega fabs launching 7nm at the same time, there's going to be plenty of capacity. And I think, I just think that Computex will make a lot of sense. They'll release their machine learning cards or whatever at the end of this year. They're very limited samples. And then just like with the previous years, in fact, I think Vega was almost exactly this. They launched in Q4 with the MI cards, or maybe very early in the following year, like January of the following year. And then it was around that Computex timeframe that we got Vega. So yeah, I'm expecting certainly they'll come out at maybe CES and say first half of 2019 for Navi, and then that will end up being June 30th. Because AMD always does right at the end of their launch windows. Yeah,
so I was right. AMD moving 7nm GPU production back to TSMC, except they're probably going to be using both.
I was thinking Global Foundries would be for their CPU products.
No, well, apparently they're using, at this stage, well, I don't know, they don't know.
Because that's just on GPUs, isn't it?
No, this is their new GPUs they're talking about. And they're talking about using both TSMC and Global Foundries for the first 7nm products. Well, so we don't know, basically. But if they're using TSMC, then NVIDIA definitely knows when they'll be able to mass produce those GPUs. So I'm thinking it'll be around the middle of next year, if I had to guess. And that's what you're saying, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah, so what do we have here? These are the Radeon Instinct stuff.
I've lost the chat again. Here we go.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out when AMD announced the MI25.
NVIDIA probably just playing with AMD, not to get in trouble with Nvidia are definitely doing what I said they're doing. The GeForce 20 series, okay, by definitely 100% speculation here. GeForce 20 series to me looks like a money grab. They've found themselves in an awesome position here with the opportunity to use the 12 nanometer process to make bigger GPUs that are cheaper to a little bit cheaper to manufacture than they would have been on the 16 nanometer process, I believe. And they're just using this window to cash in big time, get people really excited for RTX technology, charge them tons and tons of money to get this technology more mainstream, and they sell GPUs. Like, people were getting over buying Pascal 2 years. People weren't going to be buying a ton of Pascal GPUs in time for Christmas. Whereas now they're going to see a huge influx in sales. And then they get to do it all over again in probably less than 12 months.
Yep.
So it's, yeah, as Lexi said, and I said in my video, it's a stopgap money grab. It seems pretty obvious that's what it is to me anyway. We'll definitely know once if the performance numbers come out, and in the games that we currently have in our Steam libraries and whatnot are like 20% over Pascal, and ray tracing turns out to be a gimmick on the first gen like we think it will. It'll just be nowhere near powerful enough to cast the amount of rays you need to make anything look substantially different. If those two things turn out to be true, then it's very obvious that it's a stopgap and a money grab. But if it turns out that it's really impressive and much faster than we think it's going to be, then it'll be a totally different story. And the good news is it sounds like 3 weeks, well, definitely 4 weeks, you'll know. But yeah, don't pre-order. I was doing a bit of research for our Q&A, and somebody was asking whether they should buy Pascal now, as I sort of suggested in my GeForce 20 series announcement video, or hold out. So they were asking, should they buy a 2070 for $500 US, or get a 1070 Ti, which is like $450 US. That's a $50 saving. And for that, I would say just wait and see what happens. However, if you're really tight and you want a graphics card now and you've been waiting forever, if you jump on eBay, there's buy now sales for Pascal 1070 Ti's for like $280, $300 US. And that's insanely good value. So that's half the price of what I reckon you'll be able to get a 2070 for this year. And I don't think the 2070 is going to be much, if any, faster than 1070 Ti. Yeah. Speculation.
So I found this Vega information that I was looking at. So AMD announced the Radeon Instinct MI25, which is Vega based. They announced that in December of 2016, and then Vega came out in August,
almost a year later,
of 2017.
9 months or something.
So I can't find information on when exactly that card was shipping, but certainly that's when they had announced it with performance numbers, TDP, and not too much information on it. But
so if they announce at the end of this year, if you look off a similar time frame, at the earliest it would be when you project around Computex.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking, is that we're going to get a very similar, like a limited launch of their 7 nanometer GPU product at the end of this year, late Q4, and then it'll end up being Computex that we see new GPUs.
I like that. I like that theory.
That's a pure. I have no information. That's just a pure guess. But that's a very typical AMD sort of thing that they would do, especially if they're planning on launching a high-end product. Because they did launch. Admittedly, they did launch the RX 580 in April of 2017, and then that was followed by Vega in August. But
Lexi says, I'd settle for 1440p, 144Hz at a not completely absurd $1,200 price tag. Seriously, like I said, you can get that for $300 US. You're an Aussie though, so it'll be a bit different. But have a look at the Overclockers forums, or have a look at ebay.com.au. Like, well, I'll have a quick look now what you can get them for.
Here's another good question that Bruno asked in our Discord chat. I'm not sure if you've seen or covered this. So it says, why do you think AMD can't compete currently on the GPU market? Is it because they maybe shifted their focus to CPUs and forgot or didn't have the resources for their GPUs? I don't think they necessarily didn't have the resources for their GPUs. They certainly were releasing Vega products.
No, they didn't have the resources in the sense that they released a compute GPU for gaming. It's the same
It's
thing.
effectively right.
I think it's the same thing that we're going to see with the GeForce 20 series. When you can't use those RT cores and those Tensor cores, you got a big fat GPU. Like,
It's a lot of die space used for non...
yeah, you've got a big. You're going
Non-gaming
to have a big,
applications.
huge, fat GPU that costs you a ton of money. That's no faster than Pascal.
And I mean, it is the right strategy for these companies to make because they can make so much more money from compute cards than they will ever be able to make in the gaming segment.
Yeah.
Because it's much more viable for server farms and stuff that use these cards. But I think the Vega had a number of issues with it that prevented it from getting up to sort of the performance tiers that we saw with the Pascal cards. And one of them is obviously NVIDIA is still, at least in the Pascal generation, quite a lot ahead in terms of performance per watt. So Vega cards aren't super competitive in that
There's
respect.
a few shortcomings with the current design, which can be solved quite easily.
Yeah, they also decided to use Global Foundries 14 nanometer, which isn't that competitive with TSMC's 16 nanometer. So by choosing a different processing node, even though it sounds small, 14 versus 16, it sounds better. There were some issues with that particular fabrication technology that prevented them getting their designs up to the same clock speeds that NVIDIA was capable of. Because you look at something like the Vega 64, which was 4,000 CUDA cores and clocked up to 1677 megahertz, just looking at the specs here.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
NVIDIA was able to make a GPU with admittedly fewer cores. They didn't go as wide, but they were able to clock it a lot higher simply because that process technology on 16 nanometers allowed them to do that. Whereas AMD on 14 nanometer had to go with a more wide and less clocked approach. And as we were talking about earlier today before we started filming all this stuff, often as you scale wider in a GPU, you don't necessarily get perfect scaling. With clock speeds, you very much do get really good scaling with clock speeds, but with adding cores, you don't necessarily
For gaming,
get
though,
those utilized for gaming.
It's kind of like the Ryzen CPU thing, like really good for rendering, not, I shouldn't say not great for gaming, not as good as a low latency ring bus CPU for gaming. Bit of a different
Yeah.
thing. The problem with Vega is for gaming, it's kind of a bottleneck design. Like, short of using Vulkan, it's almost impossible to get all the cores working, like fully utilize it. Doesn't change your power consumption.
Yeah, that's right.
They're still
because the
on.
cores are active.
They're still
Yeah.
on and waiting for work.
That's what I was saying, that NVIDIA had that superior strategy. I mean, it's obviously dictated by the process tech, but they had that superior strategy of sticking to a narrower core design that then scales higher. I think that's a bit why you see the narrower design of Vega 56 is a bit superior in terms of its price to performance. And also, Vega was impacted by AMD's choice to use HBM2 instead of GDDR5 technology.
Yeah.
Because not only did they... I mean, HBM is a good technology, it's very fast, but games are not bandwidth limited to that extent that you require HBM2. And also, the cost increased significantly thanks to the memory increase, but it also cost a lot to begin with.
Yeah, but it's not just the games. So you need the memory bandwidth when all the cores are needing to be fed information.
Yeah, which is for a compute application.
Yes. Or it does work under something like Vulkan, which is why you see that massive leap in performance, because all the cores are active and they're all getting fed data without any bandwidth bottleneck there.
Yeah.
So, really, I think if they had NVIDIA's driver team, they would be faster.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it boils down to.
And they do have some issues with some game engines that have obviously aren't as compatible, I guess you'd say, with AMD's architecture. Unreal Engine 4 being one of them that is quite widely used.
Yeah.
So, AMD's driver team always mentions how they struggle to optimize that particular engine for their architecture. There's just, obviously, I mean...
But that engine was designed to be difficult for them to optimize.
Well,
their
that's what I was about to
architecture.
say, is that they did work closely with NVIDIA on that particular
Yeah, it's
game
no
engine.
coincidence.
No, it's no coincidence. But yeah, I mean, and every generation it seems like, there's always one aspect to these architectures that one company does better than the other. Like, for a long time, NVIDIA was always about tessellation because they had their superior tessellation engine.
Yeah.
And then AMD tried to claw that back a bit by going hard on async compute. They didn't probably get as much traction as NVIDIA got with tessellation. And now we're going to have another situation where NVIDIA will have these Tensor and RT cores to do all sorts of stuff with. And then that'll be up to AMD to bring their architecture up to that level. And also, NVIDIA's just done a lot to improve their async engine. So NVIDIA won't have that async decline, but they're adding their own special stuff. So yeah, there's always this battle of trying to add new things to architecture. I think Vega did also suffer a bit from going down the async path that was probably many, many, many years ahead of its time.
Which is what I think NVIDIA are doing with this GeForce 20 series. I'm so interested to see how they pan out in terms of power use. Yeah. I'm so skeptical of the TDP ratings on these things. I was talking about that earlier. So
yeah, well,
so the 2080 Ti has the same 250 watt TDP as the 1080 Ti, but it has more CUDA cores. It has RT cores, and it has Tensor cores.
Yeah.
And 12 nanometers shouldn't really be any more power efficient than 16.
Yeah. So
I don't know how they're pulling that off. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see what the power...
I mean, it's possible that 250 watts was a gross overestimation for the 1080 Ti.
It is. Yeah, I'd have to go and actually see what the actual power usage was for the card.
Because, I mean, I think there's a chance that, like we saw with AMD moving to 12 nanometers with their Zen CPU, that the voltage clock curve changes. So that a different clock speed becomes more optimal.
Yeah.
So, like you see with laptop GPUs, they're clocked a lot lower, but they're clocked more in that really optimal zone. So something like a 1080 in a laptop can use like 80 watts less power than the desktop card simply because they're clocked only slightly lower because it's a non-linear voltage.
Bit of a bidding process there as well, isn't it, for their really low power chips?
I believe so. I believe so for Max-Q in particular. But yeah, so that's part of a reason why they might be able to eke out that same TDP, simply because a lot of those cards are clocked very similar to the Pascal cards. They are wider, admittedly, but they're clocked similar. So there is a chance that they're in a more optimal frequency zone for those GPUs, and then just going wider, evens it out a bit. But I do agree that I think once overclocked, those cards are going to...
Well, the Titan V has a 250 watt TDP as well, and that's got 5,120 CUDA cores, and it's got a whole crap load of...
But you can see it's only clocked at 1455 megahertz on 12 nanometer.
Yeah.
So that's a low... Well, that's the boost clock. So that's a lot lower in terms of its clock speed capability. It's probably operating in a really optimal zone there for 12 nanometer.
Yeah, so we have to see what GPU Boost 3.0, I assume it's still 3.0, is doing with the GeForce 20 series. Yeah, it is Max Boost 3.0. So those clocks are all unknown. So
the real question is, how can we use these new cores for mining? Well, I think it's good that mining is sort of dying away a little bit.
Mining's continuing to die away. I mean, I'm not an expert on it. I don't really follow up, but I haven't seen much life in the mining scene at the moment.
Yeah, ASICs are just too much of a big deal.
Yeah, I don't think...
the popular coins, and there's so many minor coins that it's hard for any to get any real traction.
Yeah,
that people would blow up on GPUs
there's been so many blows to cryptocurrency itself.
Yeah.
So,
there's been a lot of uncertainty because of regulation.
Yeah, a lot of regulation with governments and businesses no longer accepting it and stuff like that. So I don't know. I am the last person you want to ask about anything cryptocurrency because I have no interest in it. But from what I've read, I don't think it's going to be a big problem again anytime soon.
Yeah, that's right.
I've only read a little bit. So what have we been doing? About an hour?
Yeah, about an hour.
Well, has anyone else got any other things they want to ask? We're going to be covering most of the GeForce 20 and RTX stuff in our Q&A. There was a lot of questions, as I said. Nesta says, mining not dying. Next ball run right around the next corner. You heard it here first. Well,
Hopefully that stuff's done with.
Hopefully.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything going to happen there, like I said, but...
We never know, 7nm might be so good that...
mining's just back on the table and no one can buy a card again.
To the disappointment of everyone, except
I wish I knew, because then I could tell you whether you should buy a Pascal card now or not.
Yep.
Jardeth said, more GM Direct 13 analysis. Oh, you should have a quick look at that.
Oh, DirectX 13.
I'm going to have a quick look for you. We'll end the stream on that. He better not be pulling my leg, because I think he might be.
Yeah, I don't think he ever...
Yeah, he's just joking. Damn it. That would have been so good if it was true.
Yeah, it's so believable too. The Gamer Mad will double down on his DirectX 12 stuff.
Yeah, I think that was sarcasm, but it just didn't translate in the comment section. Okay, Constantine has another question. Back in times, Intel had their own GPU, which was technically a CPU with lots of small cores. How NVIDIA adds more cores types to GPU? What do you think the future of GPUs are? Now NVIDIA adds. What's your take on that question?
Oh, which one? Oh, this one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, cores aren't really a thing. The way that a GPU works is there's not actually discrete cores in it. That's kind of a marketing sort of speak to sort of better explain their pipelines inside the GPU, but they're...
Yeah, it's like a block of...
Well, yeah, unlike, you know, when you see a CPU die shot, you can actually see the individual cores in there. If you look at a GPU block diagram, you don't see 3,000 cores there. You certainly see modules of you know, processing, you know, stuff, but there's definitely not, like if you look in an RTX card, there's not going to be 4,500 individual cores there. So yeah, I think they do all sorts of things to improve performance. I think the future of GPUs isn't necessarily getting wider on cores or more on clock speeds. It'll be these sort of fixed function stuff that will accelerate certain things. I think that...
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see what we get with multi-die designs and stuff like that.
Yeah, possibly as well. I mean, it'd be interesting, you know, certain effects could probably be better run on specific architectures. So, you know, fixed function hardware is always better because you can highly optimize your hardware for whatever code you're trying to run. So, you know, ray tracing is an example of people doing that. The rumors of being able to accelerate other things on the integer cores. There's all sorts of things.
The problem with the fixed stuff is it's just not flexible, unless you can find other uses for it when you're not using it.
Yeah, that's right. Is that, you know, theoretically you could have some sort of design where, I know it doesn't really work like this, but you'd have like a part of the design that's really good at like processing polygons, and then you'd have like fixed function hardware for shadows, and then more hardware that would do your like depth of field and anti-aliasing, and you have all of those. I mean, a GPU does have different pipelines and different things to do stuff like, you know, shading and doing all the polygon work and then doing all like the tessellation, and they're already separate stuff to do all those sort of things. But I think there'll be more of that as we sort of get into more advanced GPU design, simply because you can do more with less power, and that's everything.
Yeah.
But again, you run into the issues you were saying of, you know, if you're not using ray tracing in the game, the ray tracing part isn't used.
Yeah, it's less general, I suppose. Well, you can't combine the total power of all those different fixed functions to give you like a teraflop, gigaflop rating of the card. It's each individual unit, and that's where it becomes a problem, because if you have a scene that isn't using a fair percentage of those fixed functions, then the overall performance of the card isn't what you would expect it to be. That's why sort of a more general approach works. It covers more bases. Yeah. Nick says, expecting Ryzen 3000 in March, April.
Probably.
Yeah.
That's when they've done in the past. For the past 2 generations.
Yeah.
So
that'd be my best guess. Oh, Jared goes, no, I was just suggesting you talk about DirectX 13. Haha. I don't watch it. I don't even recall what he said. Graham asked a question.
What question? What are your thoughts on leadership spill?
Next. My chat keeps jumping all over the place. Stop typing, guys. I'm trying to read the...
I think we should probably think about wrapping this one up. What do you think?
Yep, I think we... So we've got, well...
An hour and 15, that's not bad.
Yep, that's not bad. We've got plenty of content coming up on the channel, though most of it will be from Tim, as I take a benchmark siesta.
Yeah, that's right.
I've got to catch up on... I started madly benchmarking all the GPUs when I heard the new GeForce cards were coming. I've got at least 30 games I'm testing with. I want to test, obviously, all the top-end AMD NVIDIA cards, maybe some older ones. I was about 6 cards in. I'd spent multiple days, and then I find that it's like a month down the track. But anyway, I'll get all that benchmarking up to date over the next week, and then I'll be ready to go, and we'll be able to do a really in-depth day 1 review. So that'll be really good. I was just going to quickly tell everyone before we go what you've got planned for
the schedule. Let's have a look at the schedule.
Let's have a look at the schedule, if I can get it to load. Here we go. Oh, come on, Trello. Alright. It's probably more my laptop than anything.
Yeah, so my Acer Nitro review, that's already live. News Corner tomorrow, obviously.
RTX Corner.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of RTX news. Then on Saturday, I've got a battle between the Intel Core i5 8250U and Ryzen 5 2500U in Fortnite. So that's pretty interesting because Intel gets destroyed.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, pretty interesting. Then we've got the Q&As going out on Sunday and Monday, and then you've got a video.
Yeah, I've started building my Coffee Ripper build. I did change the 1950X to the 2950X, like quite a few of you in the Discord chat suggested I do. And then I've got the Vega card and the Pascal card, and I've got a heap of water blocks and things, but I've installed the radiators, had a bit of fun with that. I've got the other 20-something fans, or no, I think it's about 12 fans or something like that. 15 fans. So I've got the extra 15 Corsair ML fans ready. So yeah, I've started building it, and you'll get to see my progress on the 28th. And I don't know if I'll finish it in that video. If I don't, there'll be one more video to follow. And it's not in the calendar yet, but I've got X399 board, VRM breakdowns, and temperature testing. That's all quite interesting. And then I'm doing 32 core, so the 2990WX, like cooler roundup. So testing some air coolers, some liquid coolers. That'll be interesting. And then more and more stuff, no doubt. But that's the next, what, week and a half.
Yeah, the thing I've got on Wednesday, I'm not sure whether that will go ahead on that day specifically. But, you know, I've got plenty of monitor testing, some stream testing to do, all sorts of things. So
we will stay busy. Loads of content coming. It'll be good. Hang in there. Cool. Well, Thank you for joining us for this second stream. Let us know in the Discord chat if you appreciate 2 streams, if you're only able to catch this one, and we'll make sure we do 2 every time now.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool.
All right, we'll catch you in the next one.